I talk about the original Xbox, what games come to mind? Halo Combat Evolved? Fable? Psychonauts? Well, for me, I always think of a small game about a wisecracking doll called Voodoo Vince. Created by Clayton Kozlowik and developed by Beep Industries, Voodoo Vince was released on the original Xbox on September 23, 2003. While it wasn't the most critically acclaimed game on the Xbox, it was one of my favorite games growing up. I remember it being funny and full of charm, and while I really wasn't all that good at it, I still had a ton of fun playing it. But alas, I no longer have my original Xbox, and I don't have enough money to buy one off eBay. It looks like I'll never be able to replay it, unless it gets remastered like several other games from my childhood, but what are the odds of that? Yeah, so apparently Clayton Kozlowik and Beep Games, formerly Beep Industries, announced that they were remastering Voodoo Vince, and in early 2017, Voodoo Vince Remastered was released on the Xbox One and PC. And while I was originally excited to be able to play it again, I was also nervous to jump back into it. Was this going to be a case where a game I liked as a kid really wasn't all that good, and I only liked it because of nostalgia? I mean, games have only gotten bigger and better since this one came out, and I've played several others since then. So would I even have fun playing it? And that's what I want to find out today. Is Voodoo Vince a good game, or is it one that should have been left in the past? Voodoo Vince starts in an old magic shop, where we find two burglars trying to steal our boss Madame Charmaine's zombie dust for their leader Cosmo the Inscrutable. However, they accidentally release the magic held within the dust and cause all sorts of chaos, including bringing her third best voodoo doll Vince to life. Madame Charmaine tries to stop them, but is knocked unconscious and is kidnapped along with the zombie dust, and it's up to Vince to rescue her and stop Cosmo from taking over the world. The game itself is a 3D platformer where you'll be tasked with solving a series of puzzles in order to unlock the exit to the next area. Sometimes these puzzles are as simple as finding the path to the end of the level, or collecting a certain number of objects, and other times they involve you grinding up cartoon characters into sausage to make gumbo. And while that might sound like a completely off-the-wall level concept, it actually fits into the game really well. See, Voodoo Vince has a deadpan method of storytelling where the world itself is very indifferent to you and your struggles. Most of the characters you meet along the way only seem focused on getting their own problems solved and don't really sympathize with Vince or his quest. It's a lot of, I'll help you if you help me attitudes. The same is true for the level design and the overall story. It never feels like a grand epic quest to save the world or stop the forces of evil. It comes off more as Vince putting jerks in their place and following the breadcrumbs to save his boss. Even the main villain never really seems like a threat.
If you keep trying, I swear I'm gonna use you to polish my car! Right after I get a car, that is.
Sometimes at the beginning of levels, he'll show up to mock you or tell you to give up, but I never really got the feeling he was a villain. More like an annoying loser who still lives in his mom's basement.
But you'll never make it past the piggy bank of doom!
And you know what? It kinda works. See, Vince himself meets the world's indifference with his own and approaches every situation with a dry, sarcastic attitude.
Great, that's just super. What now? The obligatory boss battle? Zombie herder. Is there anything lower professionally?
Only a gifted inventor like me can grasp the theories involved.
You're building a balloon.
This is perfectly shown the first time Vince is contacted by Cosmo in the tutorial. When Cosmo first appears, Vince tries to hide because he doesn't know who is contacting him. But once Cosmo starts making fun of him, Vince instantly gets annoyed and puts Cosmo in his place by using his powers to make him disappear. Then, he walks away while muttering how he can't believe he has to be the hero and that he's being dragged out into the world to save the day since he's just a doll. It's funny because yes, it is strange that a 10-inch voodoo doll is the one that's expected to save the day, and our villain is such a loser, but has still managed to steal powerful magic and kidnap our boss, so he is a threat to us. What helps even more is that everyone just rolls with what's happening. We never get a moment where Vince looks at the camera and goes, "Man, isn't it strange how me, a 10-inch voodoo doll, is expected to save the day?" Or, "Man, isn't the situation wacky?" While strange things might be going on throughout the game, everyone just goes with the flow like it's business as usual, and I love that method of storytelling. I get so tired of games that go out of their way to point out that things are weird or wacky because they don't think the audience audience will get it without it being explained to them, or where the whole story has to come to a complete stop because they really want you to know that something strange just occurred. Vince is one of the strongest parts of the entire game. He has such a dry personality, and it works really well with the story. When he interacts with other characters, he's usually giving sarcastic or deadpan responses, but he never really comes off as a jerk. He also has several quips he uses throughout the game, and while they're pretty weird, they honestly work for me.
Is it hot in here, or is it just me? My granny hits harder. Beats collecting lint.
I like how they're both completely random, but also don't draw too much attention to themselves. They're just subtle, strange things that he says seemingly for his own amusement, and I found it rather charming. His dialogue is written in a way I'd expect his character to speak to others. He's got personality, strengths, weaknesses, but he also doesn't come off as obnoxious or annoying because the writers really want you to laugh with his wacky antics. He's just an overall rounded character who's annoyed that he's the one being asked to answer the call to action, and he's trying to find a way to not have the experience be miserable for him. I love these kind of characters and stories because they feel like they were written by somebody who had a story to tell rather than someone who wanted to be the next big thing or appeal to as many people as possible. Some people will play this game and think it's really dumb or that Vince is really annoying, and that's okay, because there are people out there like me who will find this game really charming and have a good time playing it. Oh yeah, since this is a video game, I should probably talk about the actual game part. The game itself is divided into 6 main stages consisting of around 5 main levels and a boss stage. Each stage is centered around a specific theme, like the streets of New Orleans or the swamps, and the bosses normally are something completely random that's very loosely connected with the area. When you start the level, you're given a quick pan of the environment and usually a hint at an item you'll need to find or an objective you'll need to complete to finish the level. In each level, you can also find several hidden items to help you on your journey, like mini zombie dust bags to increase your health or voodoo icons to give you access to new powers. Vince himself has a series of basic moves like jumping, punching, and a spin attack, but it's his special moves where the game shines. Since he's a voodoo doll, he has the ability to use the pain inflicted on himself to hurt others. This comes in the form of his voodoo powers, which consists of comedic ways we watch Vince getting injured, like getting sawed in half, crushed by space junk, eaten by sharks, or running with scissors. These attacks then create a radius that will destroy almost every enemy within it. Now, while these special attacks are limited, they can be charged by collecting beads dropped by defeated enemies. It's very satisfying to use one special attack to defeat a group of enemies and then get enough beads for 3 more. Towards the end of the game, I always had 5 or more special attacks on standby, and while this might make things seem easier, the level design more than makes up for it in difficulty. The enemies are put in strategic locations and the levels would introduce more hazards, making traversal more challenging without it feeling unfair. While there's a lot I really liked about this game, it definitely wasn't without its flaws. Some of the levels take a break from the usual platforming and introduce a unique concept like flying a plane or a rail shooter. While I can appreciate trying new things, most of the time these levels fall flat. The plane is super awkward to control, and there's a racing level that's very unforgiving. If you miss one of the boosts or the shortcuts, you might as well restart. There's also a level where you're collecting shirts from a clothesline, and it gives you just barely enough to meet your goal. The final boss is also pretty anticlimactic. The boss is a giant robot that Cosmo built, and it feels like they didn't know what direction to take it in, so they just strung 4 completely separate encounters together into one big fight. You start out in a bumper car and have to fling yourself into targets to hurt the robot. Then the robot just stops and you have to climb its body in a difficult platforming challenge, and you better not fall off or you're starting the entire section over again. Then, once you get to the top, you get into a plane and you start a flying section where you need to shoot targets and avoid missiles. Then, once you do that, you find yourself inside the robot and go through yet another platforming section to reach the brain and destroy it. It just feels all over the place. Like, did we really need 2 platforming sections and 2 vehicle sections? Also, for this being the final boss, he really doesn't do a whole lot other than stand still. It just didn't feel satisfying as a final boss. That aside, I thought Voodoo Vince was a really good game, and I was really happy to return to it after all these years. But even after finishing it, it did leave me thinking about a few things. See, what I liked most about Voodoo Vince was that it felt like it was made by a team of passionate developers who had a story to tell and wanted to make a silly little game about a voodoo doll. It's the kind of game that unfortunately has started fading away from the world of gaming. It's getting harder to find small little games that you can play through from start to finish in a few hours. More modern games just keep getting bigger and bigger and getting filled with even more stuff to do. Some games basically become a second job with how much you're expected to accomplish. I mean, take Starfield. While I am excited to play it, the prospect of having over 1,000 planets to explore sounds exhausting. It doesn't sound like something I can just pick up and play for a couple hours, but now it's something I need to dedicate time towards completing objectives and gathering resources in order to get slightly better stats. I mean, I'm sure I'll enjoy playing it, but I do miss having these smaller games that I can just pick up, beat a few levels, and then put down for a while. There comes a point when a video game no longer feels like a game, but more like a chore, where a 10-hour game becomes a 100-hour game with 10 hours of fun and 90 hours of filler. I'd rather pay $30 for a short game that I enjoy rather than $70 for a long game that I'm expected to sink hundreds of hours into before I get to the good part. That's why as I've been getting older, I've been turning more towards the indie gaming space. I've had much more fun playing through games like Subnautica and Cult of the Lamb than I did playing through games like Fallout 4, even though I've sunk way more hours into Fallout 4. While most indie games are smaller in scope, they're usually packed full of content and fun things to do. The most fun I had in Fallout 4 was exploring the wasteland, but as soon as I had to start being a part of the story, I tuned out. I kept getting swamped by quests and objectives where I was expected to go to a location, kill a certain number of bad guys, and then return just to get another quest of the exact same type over and over again. It quickly became a chore. Meanwhile, in Subnautica, I was dropped onto an ocean planet, and that's it. It was up to me to decide what to do next. I had way more fun exploring on my own than constantly being told where to go. Now, I'm not trying to say that big AAA studios are bad and indie games are the future. They both have their pros and cons, but I do wish that game developers would focus on shorter games packed with fun things rather than massive games bloated with too many things to do. I'd rather have a small map full of things to explore than a massive one that's mostly empty. A short story that keeps me engaged rather than a long one that's a slog to get through. A game with vision rather than one that's been focus tested to appeal to the broadest audience without having any real substance. Voodoo Vince was a very fun game for me to play through again, and while it did bring back some fond memories, it also made me miss a simpler time where games were just fun little things to play through and complete rather than major time investments. I mainly miss that time of innovation where developers were more creative with their character setting and stories, where they took risks and developed games as passion projects because they had a story to tell and not just to make the most amount of money. I do realize this isn't a simple problem, but rather a complicated issue that won't have an easy solution. That being said, I have been finding the same enjoyment playing indie titles and games with smaller dev teams more than the new massive titles that have been coming out. I think a perfect balance would be for a company to have a small team working on smaller games and a big team working on one or two big games, so they aren't relying so heavily on one massive game to reach impossible numbers or the company will be forced to go out of business. I mean, look at games like Stardew Valley, Neon White, and Hades. Did they make billions of dollars? No, but did they amass a huge cult following and still have several fans playing their games? Yes. Even Five Nights at Freddy's started out as a simple point-and-click horror game, and now look at it, it's one of the biggest franchises in modern media. Gaming has definitely changed a lot since I was a kid, but I'm glad to see that several of the games I liked were able to find new homes on platforms like Steam. I think middle-tier games like this one, which sit between indie games and big AAA games, are only going to increase in popularity, and I hope to see more games like Voodoo Vince that are developed by people with a vision and a story to tell, and we get to experience it with them. Sure, not all of them are going to be great, but I am curious to see what the next big franchise is and what humble beginnings they'll start from. Let me know if there's any games you'd like me to review in the future, and let me know what your thoughts are in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video. See ya!